Welcome back to Lisa's Family Table. The weather is definitely getting cooler, even here in Memphis, and for me, that always takes me to comfort food. So today, I'm going to share with you one of our favorite comfort food recipes, a beef stew. And as with most of our recipes, we're going to amp it up a little bit. So let me walk you through what we're going to do. So what I've got is, I bought some boneless short rib. I bought it at a big box store, and I've cubed it. And these are about 1.5 inch pieces. I've trimmed it up and I've cubed it. The recipe calls for 2 pounds. The package had 2.5 pounds. You can never go wrong with a little more, so I'm okay there. I've got my carrots, which I've peeled and I've cut. Now, I want to show you because they're bigger. When I do a stew, I like my carrots to be bigger because I don't like them to get mushy in the stew. I want them to have some texture. And they come out just absolutely beautiful this way. You'll see when the stew is finished. We're going to put some celery in. I'm not going to use all of this celery, but we're some celery. And then on the onions, I've cut them a little bit bigger too because I don't want them to melt. I want to see the onions in the stew. I've got some of my homemade stock here. If you don't want to make your stock, that's okay. Use it unsalted, preferably like a bone stock would be terrific here because it's going to have a lot of extra flavor to it. I've got a couple of bay leaves. I've got my rosemary that I've taken off the stock, and I'm actually going to chop it up. I don't want to have these big leaves, you know, coming into my mouth when I'm eating. So I like it to be chopped, but it is definitely a good flavor booster. And we're going to have a little bit of tomato paste, some red wine, Worcestershire, and of course, LSR. This just takes all the thinking out of it, right? So we're going to season it. So to begin, we're going to put some flour on the meat and LSR on the meat. We're going to brown it. Take it out, and then we're going to work with the rest of our aromatics. The reason we're putting flour is because it does help brown the meat, but also when we create the mixture for the stew, it will help as the stew is in the oven to give it that thick gravy texture that we all like. We're going to wrap this dish up with some mushrooms that we're going to saute and caramelize and stir in at the top at the finish of the stew. So this is going to be a fun dish to plate. So stick with us as we go through the recipe. Let's go ahead and begin. So we've already got our beef, as I mentioned earlier. It's cubed up. I'm going to put some flour on it. I don't want a lot of flour, I just want it to have a thin coating, so I'm just kind of putting this on, and I'll shake the flour off as I put it into the pan, okay? And I'm going to have this pan to take it out when they brown, because you don't want to put it all in at the same time because it'll steam. We really want to do a layer at a time, so it'll take us a couple of rounds, and we're going to be really liberal with our steak rub. So we're going to go in here with the steak rub. It's 2.5 pounds of meat. You're going to be putting wine, stock, all kinds of stuff in it. So it may seem like a lot, but it's not nearly as much as you think it is. Get all this in here, get it all coated. Okay, that's good. Wipe our hands off. Okay. I'm going to turn our pan on. Let me get some tongs. And you're just putting a neutral oil in this. I'm just using your standard basic cooking oil. This is vegetable oil. And as I go through the different rounds of this, I'll probably have to add more. And then once I get all my meat brown, I'm going to saute my onions and my celery, and the carrots will go in last. Again, I really want to protect them because they add so much flavor, color, and texture to the dish. I really don't want to get them mushy. So we're letting our oil get hot, and then we're going to brown the meat, and we're going to get our stock ready. And while the meat is browning, what we're also going to do is we're going to chop up our rosemary here and get that done. We just want it to be finer pieces so that we're giving the flavor to the stew, but we're not having, you don't want to bite into it and get a big piece of rosemary. It can be a little bit piney if it gets in too much, but it's a perfect complement to beef. So you can see I'm just chopping it up. This was 2 stalks. I would say that it's about a tablespoon of rosemary if I were measuring it. And I've got some parsley that I'm going to finish the dish with for color. Okay, so that's done. All right, my oil is just about hot. Wait till we get it nice and shimmery. You can see the stock is still frozen. I pulled it out of the freezer. I make stock once a month, and I'll post a recipe for it. It's really great if you just, you have a weekend where you don't have a lot going on. You can throw it on the stove in the morning and let it cook. And then you put it in the freezer and you've got stock. I love doing those little make-ahead things that when I go to make something like this that make the dish extra special. You can hear my sizzling, that's what we want. And we're just going in here with one layer. And we're not looking to cook the beef at this point. We just want to get some color on it. It's called the Maillard effect. Golden brown, delicious, GBD. Makes the dish so much better. A lot of people think it seals in the juices. It's not really true. It just adds another element of texture and flavor to the meat. Our dog is not here today. He will be super disappointed. This would be one of his favorite dishes, to beg and get a little doggy treat. But he'll be home later today. We'll have to save him some. I would love if you would post below what your favorite comfort dish is. I think comfort dishes mean different things to different people. For me, comfort dish is like a stew, a soup. Of course, pasta is always a go-to comfort dish for me. We're gonna post another recipe this month on our Italian wedding soup, and we're excited for you to try that one. Soup, when it gets cold, I love anything that's a stew or a soup. And I love making soups that I make the night before, because if you're like me and you're working from home these days, it's great to have something that you can just pull out of the refrigerator for lunch. It's so comforting. Okay, we're getting a nice brown color here. It looks super pretty. And you can see it's probably gonna take us 3 rounds to do all this meat. It really is a hands-off dish. After we do all this part here, it just goes in the oven. We do have some potatoes I forgot to mention that we're gonna put in it as well. I don't like to put my potatoes in at the very beginning of the cook, because again, I don't like my vegetables mushy. I don't like them to disintegrate. So we're gonna put this in the oven for a little bit over an hour, and then we're gonna put the potatoes in for the last 45 minutes of cooking time, so that they're nice and tender, but they still have some structure to them. I really want to be able to see the pieces of the stew. I'm not looking for a goulashy type of thing. Smells so good in here. You could already smell the flavors coming out of the LSR and the beef. Oh, I really wish you were here. That term smell-o-vision may be a little overused, but right now it's the first thing that comes to mind. And again, this is the boneless short rib. So it's going to be a tender cut anyway, and anytime you get to a cut of meat like this that has a lot of connective tissue, it'll be cooked through, but there's a point that you have to cook it beyond that, where that connective tissue breaks down, and that's when you get to that super unctuous, tender flavor that we all love, right? So you see my pieces are brown, they're coming out. And you don't have to use tin pans like this. They're a super big convenience for us when you're cooking making videos. Use whatever you want to retrieve them in. This is also a great one-pot dish, so if you're talking about not wanting to do a lot of dishes, once you get all the ingredients in this, and I love things like that, right? I love things that are super easy to do, get them in the oven, and they kind of take care of themselves. And you're not having to dirty 15 dishes. And the nice thing is, once you pull this out of the oven, you throw a salad with it, some crusty bread. I mean, dinner is done, and all you have is the one pan to clean up after, which is great. Okay, so I just pulled all my meat out. It looks great. I put just a little bit more oil in. I've turned my temperature down a little bit. I'm gonna put my onions in. And I'm going to put some of my celery in that I cut up. Basically, you're looking for 2 stalks of celery, depending on the size. And the celery, you can see I have it smaller. I don't mind if that, isn't in big pieces. I want to have the flavoring that it provides, but I don't want big pieces of it. Okay, so I've got it in here. And all this stuff on the bottom, that's spawn, that's flavor. That's going to be great. I'm going to deglaze that with some wine here in a second. All I'm looking for on the onions is for them to get translucent, which they're doing pretty quickly here. And for wine, cook with the wine you'd want to drink. Don't cook with the most expensive wine, but an affordable bottle of wine that you'd also want to drink. Okay, so here goes our wine. Okay. This recipe loves wine. Be generous. We want to go ahead and scrape up all that flavor from the bottom. That was about a cup of wine. You can download the recipe in the link below. And again, I really want some feedback on what your comfort dishes are. I hope you'll try this one. I hope it'll become one of your comfort dishes. Okay, so I want the wine to reduce a little bit, just to kind of get some of the alcohol flavor out of it. I think it needs a little more though, don't you? A little more. Never too much. Here we go. Okay, so I'm gonna bring that heat up. I'm gonna let that just reduce a little bit, and then I'm gonna put some Worcestershire in, I'm gonna put some tomato paste, and then we're gonna build our stew out. You can smell the alcohol. The smell of the alcohol is diminishing. We're getting where we wanna be. Okay, so some Worcestershire. It's like all of our recipes. You build layers, right? Layers upon layers of flavor. Okay, we're going in. I've got a can of tomato paste. You can also get the squeezed tomato paste. So I'm gonna go in with about half of this tomato paste. We don't need the full thing. We don't really want it to be tomato forward. And before we add anything else, we wanna kinda get that tomato paste. So that looks great. Okay. Now, we're gonna put our meat back in and all the juices that have accumulated. Those are delicious flavor. Our carrots, which we made sure to keep structurally intact. 2 bay leaves or 1, your preference. I like 2 because I like the flavor. Okay. We're going in with our rosemary. I'm gonna grab a couple of cloves of garlic I forgot about. On the garlic, you just really want to smash them. This is going to cook, and the garlic is going to melt into the stew. So you're not looking, you don't have to go chopping it all up. Okay, stock. This is still a little frozen, as you can see. That's okay. All right. I'm going to let my stock, my little ball of stock ice. Oh, it smells so good. It smells so good. And you can see how pretty the carrots look. They're bright, and because we kept them in these bigger pieces, when it comes out, they're gonna have some caramelization to them, but they're not going to be, you know, mushy or anything like that. So the stew is ready, and you can see I've covered the meat. There's a little more in here, because remember, we're gonna add potatoes later, so we need to have a little space for that. And we're not going to add any more seasoning right now, because this is going to reduce, and we're gonna check it for flavor later. So it's going in the oven. Here we go. All right, welcome back to our table. Our stew has been cooking. It smells so good in here. We're gonna put our potatoes in. We've got these new potatoes. We've cut them in bite-sized pieces in keeping with our carrots. We want them to have some structure. I'm gonna pull our stew out. There we go. Looks so good. Potatoes in. Over here, stir it up. It's coming together beautifully. Okay. All right, that's gonna go in for about 45 more minutes, and we'll thicken our sauce at the very end. It'll need a little bit of thickening. Okay, we've brought our stew out of the oven. It's beautiful. And what we're gonna do next is we're going to saute the mushrooms that we talked about earlier. And I've got a little butter in here. I've got the mushrooms. I'm gonna put a little bit of the wine in, some shallots, some of the wine, some salt.
The garlic?
No, not for the mushrooms. Okay, here we go. And you've got some toast going.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I better check it too.
So these are cremini mushrooms. We've cut them pretty big. Just gonna put a little salt in there. The butter is gonna melt. Put a little bit of our shallot in. And we're gonna top our stew with this. The stew looks great. We're letting it rest. I've got the top popped off of it to let it rest. We're just gonna saute these. By the time our mushrooms are done, our toast will be done, our stew will have rested, and we're ready to eat. It's going to be delicious. So the mushrooms are starting to break down a little bit. I've put some salt on them. As I mentioned earlier, a little shallot. I'm gonna put a little Worcestershire on them. And then some of the wine that we used in making the stew. Just a little bit. Just stir it around. You could put some fresh thyme in here. They didn't have any that looked great at the store when I went, so I didn't get any. Again, like cooking is about what's the freshest when you go to the store. So we're just gonna let these break down and then we're gonna plate this dish. Russell's toast is about ready to come up. He always makes the best toast, and I feel like, you know, when you have a stew, you want something to sop it up. He was wishing we had made some cornbread. So feel free to make cornbread for this too. I think that would be a terrific addition. The reason I don't cook the mushrooms in the stew itself is I want them to have some texture. I don't want them to have a mushy feel to them. A lot of times when people say they don't like mushrooms, I think it's because they're eating a mushroom that hasn't been cooked properly. So we really want these to sort of caramelize, and then we're gonna add it to the stew and it's gonna be perfect. Okay, let that break down a little bit. Our bread should be coming up. I'm ready to try this, aren't you?
I'm about ready. Give me about 1 more minute.
That's about what we're gonna eat about 2 or 3 minutes here. And you can see these were so big when we first cut them, they just really shrink. That's why you really want to cut them where they're big enough where you can kind of see. It was like the trick to the whole stew. Remember, the carrots were kind of bigger, the potatoes were bite-sized. We put the potatoes in later. Everything in the stew is tender, but it's not mushy, it's not falling apart. Okay, almost done here. You can see all the water is just about gone, and we're getting ready to move this back. We're going to incorporate it in our stew. It's just going to add just another layer. You can certainly skip this if mushrooms aren't your thing, but if you love mushrooms as much as we do, don't skip it because it's going to be delicious. Okay.
I'll get caramelized now.
Put them over here. I'm going to get some. This is really hot because I just took it out of the oven a few minutes ago. I'm going to bring it over. I've let it rest. It's been out for about 7 or 8 minutes, not a full 10. As you can see, it looks great. You could certainly thicken it up some if you want. It didn't probably get as thick as I might have liked it to be, but you can see, okay, the carrots are good structure, the potatoes look great. This looks really good. Okay, mushrooms in. Okay. Just give it a stir.
Looks really hearty, honey. I'm looking forward to having this.
I want a piece of little toast though. You gotta have that. I'm gonna dip. I'm a dipper.
Oh my.
Oh, well, the toast is perfect with it.
Meat's very tender.
I'm gonna taste the carrot.
Broth is very good.
Really good. I haven't tasted the meat yet. Did you get a mushroom?
Yeah, it goes good with the toast. I think it goes good with cornbread just as well. So hot, hot, hot. Yep.
Delicious. I'm gonna put a little more LSR on mine.
Mushrooms are just fabulous. I'm fine.
Oh, it's pretty much good. It's not even open. Okay.
So.
Okay. Yeah, the mushrooms go perfect with it.
Yeah. Fabulous.
From our table
to yours. Hey, we look forward to seeing you next time.
Just keep cooking. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you can get notification of our upcoming videos. We post every Thursday and you won't want to miss a single video.